Chapter 1. Arrival at the inn. Lucy and her husband James arrive at the quaint inn nestled in the countryside. At the small inn on a crisp autumn evening. The inn was nestled among the rolling hills of the countryside, surrounded by dense forests that shrouded the area in a blanket of eerie silence. The couple had been eagerly anticipating this getaway for months, and the quaint charm of the inn only added to their excitement. As they entered their room, they were struck by the antique furniture that gave the room a timeless feel. But as they settled in, they began to notice strange occurrences. The curtains rustled even though the windows were shut, and the furniture seemed to move on its own. James brushed it off as the quirks of an old building, but Lucy's unease began to grow. As nightfall approached, a chill crept into the room, causing Lucy to shiver. James tried to comfort her, but even he couldn't ignore the draft of cold air that seemed to be seeping in from nowhere. As they drifted off to sleep, strange noises echoed through the walls, as though something was moving around the room. Lucy awoke in the middle of the night, feeling as though she was being watched. She sat up and peered into the darkness, but could see nothing. A faint whisper seemed to float through the air, sending a shiver down her spine. James slept soundly beside her, unaware of the eerie presence in the room. As Lucy lay back down, her thoughts began to race. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but the feeling of being watched persisted. She tried to shake it off and drift back to sleep, but as she closed her eyes, she felt a cold breath on her face. She sat up quickly, only to see an empty room. The room was silent and still, and yet Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She tried to wake James, but he was sound asleep. She was alone with her fear and the growing sense that something was not right about the inn. As she lay awake in the darkness, Lucy couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the inn was hiding. Was it just her imagination, or was something truly amiss in this seemingly innocent place? Only time would tell, but for now, she was left to face the unknown terrors that lurked in the night. Chapter 2. The haunted history of the inn. Lucy and James spend the morning exploring the quaint inn, taking in the charming decor and the peaceful countryside views. However, as the day goes on, they can't shake the feeling that something is off. Their belongings seem to have been moved around their room, and a chill runs through their bodies even though the sun is shining bright. Curiosity gets the best of them, and they inquire about the history of the inn at the front desk. The innkeeper, a grizzled old man, looks surprised but willing to share. He tells them a tale of a horrific murder that occurred in their very room decades ago, leaving the couple with a sense of unease. As the night falls, they begin to experience strange occurrences. Footsteps can be heard outside their door, even though no one is there when they check. They notice that furniture is moved and there are cold drafts of air. Lucy begins to feel that they are not alone in their room. Desperate for answers, James and Lucy head to the library in the inn to research the murder. The librarian warns them to stay away from the topic, but they are undeterred. They come across an old newspaper article that tells the tale of a couple who were staying in their very room. The husband had murdered his wife in a fit of jealousy and was later caught and executed. Lucy and James start to put the pieces together, realizing that the disturbances they have been experiencing could be the ghost of the murdered wife seeking justice. They start to feel a sense of dread, fearing for their safety. As they retire to their room, they notice that the temperature has dropped dramatically. The room is now icy, and their breaths form white puffs of air. They hear a strange noise, and suddenly, the door slams shut on its own. They are now trapped in a room with an unseen presence. The couple tries to calm their nerves, but their fear only grows as they hear footsteps and the sound of someone whispering. They realize that this could not be ignored anymore and they have to do something, that is, either they run away or release the seal off this spirit. By chanting the name of the Holy God and Almighty, they close their eyes trying to pass the night. Chapter 3. The ghostly apparition. Lucy lay in bed, her eyes heavy with sleep as she drifted off. Suddenly, she jolted awake, her heart racing. There was something in the room with her. She tried to move, but she was frozen in place. She couldn't even scream for help. Slowly, she turned her head to the foot of the bed, and there she saw it. A ghostly apparition of a woman in Victorian-era clothing, her face twisted in an expression of sadness and desperation. The woman's eyes met Lucy's, and she seemed to be staring right at her. Lucy's breath caught in her throat, and she felt a cold sweat break out across her body. She wanted to run, to escape from the room and the apparition that stood before her. But she was paralyzed, unable to move or even speak. The woman slowly began to move towards Lucy, her ghostly form hovering inches above the floor. Lucy's heart pounded in her chest as the apparition approached, her eyes never leaving Lucy's. As the woman drew closer, Lucy could see every detail of her Victorian-era clothing, from the lace on her sleeves to the corseted bodice of her dress. She looked like a ghost from another time, lost and trapped in this world. Lucy could feel the presence of the woman like a heavy weight on her chest. She wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but she was still unable to move or make a sound. Just as the woman was about to reach Lucy, she suddenly vanished into thin air. Lucy was left alone in the room, gasping for breath and covered in a cold sweat. She knew that what she had seen was real, and she was more frightened than she had ever been before. When James turned towards her, he found Lucy shaking and pale. She told him about the ghostly apparition she had seen, and he tried to reassure her that it was just her imagination. But Lucy knew that what she had seen was real, and she was determined to uncover the truth behind the haunting of the inn. Chapter 4: Ouija Board. Determined to uncover the truth behind the ghostly apparition, Lucy and James decide to use a Ouija board to communicate with the spirit. Lucy and James sit in their dimly lit room, the Ouija board spread out before them. The planchette moves slowly across the board, spelling out cryptic messages from the spirit they have contacted. The air around them seems to grow thick and heavy, and a chill runs down Lucy's spine. She can feel a presence in the room, and it feels malevolent. As they continue to communicate with the spirit, the messages become more disturbing. The woman reveals that she was brutally murdered in the very room they are in, and her killer was never caught. Lucy feels a surge of fear and revulsion, realizing that they are in the midst of a violent and vengeful spirit. Suddenly, the planchette begins to move rapidly, spelling out a message that chills Lucy to the bone. "He is here," it spells out, and Lucy can feel a presence behind her. She turns slowly, her heart pounding in her chest, to see the ghostly figure of a man standing in the corner of the room. The man is grotesque and distorted, his features twisted in rage and hatred. He advances towards them, and Lucy and James scramble to get away. They run out of the room and down the hallway, the ghostly figure in pursuit. As they reach the staircase, Lucy trips and falls, her ankle twisting painfully. James turns to help her, and they both see the ghostly figure hovering over them. They try to crawl away, but the figure is too quick, and it grabs them both with its cold, ethereal hands. Lucy and James scream in terror as the ghostly figure drags them back towards their room. They try to fight back, but their efforts are in vain against the supernatural strength of the ghost. They can feel the cold, bony fingers tightening around their throats, suffocating them as they struggle for breath. Finally, they collapse onto the floor, their bodies racked with pain and fear. The ghostly figure looms over them, its face twisted in triumph. Lucy and James know that they are at the mercy of this malevolent spirit, and they can only pray that they will survive its wrath. Chapter 5: The Finale. As Lucy and James continue their investigation into the ghostly apparition's murder, they become more and more entangled in the inn's dark history. Every step they take seems to bring them closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. They start by combing through old records, piecing together the events of that fateful night. They discover that the victim was a young woman named Isabella, who was staying at the inn with her husband. The husband had a motive for the murder. He had been having an affair with the innkeeper's wife and wanted to inherit the property. Lucy and James begin to feel as though they are being watched as they delve deeper into the inn's history. They start to experience unexplained occurrences, objects moving on their own, whispers in the dark, and cold spots in the room. They know they are getting closer to the truth, but they can't shake the feeling that they are in danger. As they search for evidence, they stumble upon a hidden room in the basement of the inn. The room is filled with dusty old furniture and cobwebs, but it is also filled with clues. They find an old diary belonging to the innkeeper's wife, detailing her affair with Isabella's husband and their plot to kill her. The more they read, the more terrified they become. It becomes clear that they are not alone in the inn. The ghostly apparition of Isabella is still seeking justice and will stop at nothing to get it. As they try to leave the basement, they realize they are locked in. Panic sets in as they hear the sound of footsteps approaching. They hide behind some old furniture, holding their breath as the footsteps grow closer. Suddenly, the door creaks open, revealing a figure in a long, tattered dress, the ghostly apparition of Isabella. She moves towards them, her eyes blazing with an otherworldly fire. James and Lucy are frozen with fear, unable to move as the ghostly figure approaches. Isabella's ghostly hand reaches out, pointing towards the diary in James' hands. Her voice echoes in the room, commanding them to bring the evidence to the authorities and bring her killer to justice. As quickly as she appeared, Isabella's ghostly form fades away into the darkness. Shaken and scared, Lucy and James flee the inn with the diary in hand. They make their way to their room. They discovered that the previous owners of the inn had been involved in the crime and had gone to great lengths to cover up their tracks. The couple was horrified by the sheer brutality of the murder and the fact that it had gone unpunished for so long. As they dug deeper, Lucy and James began to experience strange occurrences, much more frequent and intense than before. They would hear footsteps coming down the hallway when no one was there, and doors would slam shut on their own. They could feel a sinister presence that seemed to follow them everywhere they went. One evening, as they were searching through an old storage room, they stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside, they found a blood-stained knife, which they believed was the murder weapon. The discovery of the knife only intensified the haunting activity in the inn. Lucy and James would wake up in the middle of the night to find their sheets twisted and turned in knots. They would hear whispers and moans in the darkness and feel icy fingers brush against their skin. Despite the increasing danger, Lucy and James were determined to bring the murderer to justice. They compiled all the evidence they had collected and presented it to the authorities. As it turned out, the murderer had died long ago, but the couple's efforts had helped bring closure to the victim's restless spirit. The inn no longer felt haunted, and Lucy and James could finally rest easy, knowing that they had done their part to right a wrong that had been haunting the place for so many years.